say that Ben, the Senior Vice President of Energy Services of Bank of America, is on the call. He's the 401 number. So sorry, Ben, I got your email. Welcome to the chat, and thank you for tuning in.
Great.
And I think you have permission, Paul, for screen sharing.
Okay. Can everyone see this then? And actually, I'm going to unshare and maximize it real quick just so you can see it better. Great. Well, thanks again for having me here. It's really nice to meet everyone. So again, my name is Paul Scharfenberger. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Clean Energy Fund. I definitely want to keep this an informal discussion. This is really intended to be helpful for you folks. So as I'm moving through the presentation, I thought it could be helpful just to walk you through our past, present, and future. We have a little bit of a unique trajectory that we've taken that I think could be helpful to other states. So I wanted to walk you through that, but please feel free to jump in, ask questions. I'm going to do my best to motor through this pretty quickly so that we can then leave as much time for discussion as possible. I'm also going to speak somewhat at a low tone, so please let me know if you have any trouble hearing me. My daughter just went down for a nap and I do not dare wake her up, so I'm going to do my best to keep an even tone here. So but let me know if you have a hard time hearing me at all. So I'm going to walk us through just our organizational briefing, essentially how we got started, where we are today. I'd like to describe what our inaugural lending products are going to be, our capital structure and operating model. And then ultimately, what I think is probably most important to this group is lessons learned and our priorities ahead. So we got our start really back in 2015. I had attempted to run legislation when I was at the Colorado Energy Office to create a quasi-public green bank. I tried 2 years running and we failed miserably. We didn't have the votes. And around the same time, I got connected to CGC. And really, at the time, we were trying to figure out how do we get a green bank started here in Colorado. Fortunately, around that time, Department of Energy had issued a competitive grant offering. CGC and we at the Energy Office partnered together, applied for it with the intent of essentially analyzing the viability of a green bank in Colorado and how we could stand one up, particularly recognizing the legislative struggles that we were having in a purple state. So we began that effort in 2017. It was 18-month analysis. We ultimately decided at the same time that we were going through that process, the first nonprofit green bank popped up. And so that really influenced our process. And in 2018, we ultimately decided to stand up a nonprofit green bank. And that is the Colorado Clean Energy Fund. It was announced by Governor Hickenlooper. I think it was about 4 days before he left office. So it was incorporated in December of 2018. How we are unique is, unfortunately, Governor Hickenlooper did decide not to fund the institution. It was essentially, I believe in a green bank, I want to see it happen, and go forth and make it happen. So we do have quite a bit different kind of origin story as compared to Connecticut and some of the other green banks that I think you've heard from. And so I think this hopefully should show the group maybe a different path that you can take. Since the time, especially considering that we didn't receive an infusion of public capital, we've been working to do essentially 4 things. One is secure our operating funding. So essentially salaries, overhead, something that would allow the Colorado Clean Energy Fund to hire its executive director. Number 2, establish the governance structure. 3, close a transaction. And 4, structure and deploy our inaugural lending products. So I'll walk you through these a little bit more detail. So number 1 on the established governance structure, well, actually I should back up. Number 1 on the operating capital, CGC, working with them, did a really great job of helping us connect with a national foundation that ultimately gave us 3 years of operating capital. And what that was used for was essentially to bring me on as a full-time executive director. So it's a modest amount, but it at least allowed us, I was working on this on the side while I had another full-time job. So it allowed me to jump to this full time and really dedicate my efforts to growing this institution, which was hugely important. The second was the governance structure. So we got our articles of incorporation filed, we adopted our board bylaws, we got a board in place. We're convening that board, which again was hugely important. We did close a transaction. We didn't have investment capital. So we say, quote unquote, close a transaction. What we did was essentially facilitate a transaction between a local utility and several different lenders. They needed a blended pool of capital to support an OnBill financing program. They had tried to do it for several years, weren't able to. And through our network, we were able to bring all those partners together and structure that capital stack. So it was a good bit of press. It allowed us to kind of trumpet a success story here locally. And the idea that was that would then bolster our capital raising efforts. We ultimately identified a revenue and operating model. That transaction showed us one thing, that we originally had this idea of, look, we don't have investment capital, but if we can facilitate transactions, maybe we could take a fee from that service. And maybe that could help us at least get off the ground. Well, we quickly got educated on broker-dealer laws, which preclude you from taking fees from those types of arrangements. So we quickly realized this whole notion of kind of originating transactions on behalf of other lenders and getting modest revenue infusions from that just wasn't going to be a viable business model, which was a good lesson to learn. So that also made us realize, in order to make this work, you have to have your own capital that you are lending. And I'm still locked in. I'd love to hear any other alternative pathways, but I think the only way to really make this work is to raise enough investment capital that you can then earn origination fees and interest on your loans to sustain the business. So we ultimately learned those lessons, and then lastly, structure and deployed our lending products. I'll walk you through what these are, but we essentially, for the past year, we've been working to structure our first 2 loan products, which we would then raise our investment capital to support. So those loan products, I mentioned the 18-month process that we went through with the Department of Energy grant in partnership with Coalition for Green Capital. These were the 4 phases of that effort. We did a landscape assessment. We identified what clean energy products were already available in Colorado. Working our way backwards, that also helped us to identify what wasn't available. And that allowed us to make product recommendations and ultimately lead to the deployment of products. And 2 of the areas that we found were our 2 most pressing clean energy finance gaps in the state. And I should say there are a lot, but 2 of the most pressing and concerning to us were small commercial building owners who are having a really hard time accessing capital for energy improvements to their buildings. The projects are just too small, and you're going to find traditional lenders have a really hard time financing small projects. And it's because these projects have a lot of idiosyncrasies. They can be tough to underwrite and expensive. And when you're looking at the size of the project, that ultimately means it doesn't have much of a profit potential. So you'll see small commercial buildings often get neglected. And we felt this was actually a gap that we could easily fill. And it's a huge opportunity. In Colorado, we have a large rural areas with a lot of small commercial buildings. So large market potential and a really good role we felt for a nonprofit to play. We could deal with the thin margins that traditional lenders can't. So we thought this was a good role for us. The second is low and moderate income residences. I'm sure this group knows as well as I, it's really difficult for these residences to access capital. Traditional commercial lenders use the same underwriting box, and it's traditionally focused on FICO scores. And it's staggering how many people in this country don't even have credit scores. And then there's quite a few people with poor credit scores. Also, debt to income is a common measure for underwriting these folks. And those 2 combined often exclude a really significant portion of our population. And that's problematic. We say often, we're never going to decarbonize our economy by investing in a subset of people and projects. So we absolutely need to solve this issue. And we feel that OnBill repayment in partnership with utilities is a particularly effective tool for reaching low and moderate income households. And we can get into this a little bit more. But these are the 2 loan products that we're seeking to launch over the coming year. And I'll move quickly on this. I'm not sure if South Carolina has a commercial PACE program, but we do here in the state. We think it's a great program to leverage for our small commercial lending product. That said, we do plan to also create just a long-term unsecured loan product for small commercial business owners as well. With commercial PACE, it's a tax assessment-based financing program. It's secured with a senior tax lien. Some building owners aren't going to want that. And so we want two complementary products that can kind of fill this whole small commercial building owners needs. We also chose this as our program to base our first product because, again, we needed to raise investment capital. And as a new institution with a essentially non-existent balance sheet, we were going to foundations and trying to raise program-related investments and impact investments. We felt that by leveraging an already secure program where the investments that are secured by a tax lien, instead of just underwriting us as an organization, they could look at the underlying product that their capital would be used for and get some assurance from the security of the underlying product. That's all to say, if you're in the same situation or South Carolina or anyone else is moving towards creating a green bank that needs to raise investment capital, there's areas of need, but then there's also areas within those areas of need trying to think through what is going to be most attractive to the funders that you're attempting to raise capital from. Because you kind of have to marry the two, at least in the early days. And that was one reason why we selected this as one of the products that we were going to launch. And what we've seen in commercial PACE here in the state is the program is doing well. It's financed about 90 projects for a total of 150 million now. But that means the average size project is over $1 million. And that is plenty of evidence for us to show that small projects are not getting supported by the program. Additional empirical evidence, actually, we have found that the majority of projects that apply to our program are less than $250,000. And we've only closed a handful of those projects. So it's a great program, but there's a gap there. And again, we felt this was an area that we could fill this gap. And the way that we're planning to do it is we will be the direct lender on small transactions. They're uneconomical to commercial lenders, but again, we're a nonprofit. We just need to cover our costs. So we're fine with the thin margins. So we'll go out, we'll incur the brain damage of originating, underwriting, and servicing a bunch of small projects. And then when we get to a scale that is attractive to those commercial lenders, we'll sell those portfolios to them. We have 3 lenders right now that we're negotiating the terms, but are verbally committed to purchasing portfolios from us. And if it's 2 banks and 1 private equity PACE lender. But this doesn't have to be a PACE construct. This is a construct that could be applied in a number of different scenarios. But what we found is a lot of these commercial lenders are happy to sit on a diversified pool of projects. They just don't want to go through the process again of doing the origination and underwriting of a bunch of small projects. So this was a market gap where we found that an intermediary could play a really valuable role. Also, again, the fact that we have to raise investment capital, raising capital can be a daunting process, and we needed to find a way to maximize the impact of whatever capital we could raise. And if you think of this construct, say that we could only raise $5 million, for example. With this construct, we could finance $5 million of projects, sell them, recapitalize our balance sheet, and do it again and again and again. The St. Paul Port Authority is doing this in Minnesota. They started with a $15 million loan fund that they have since revolved 10 times by selling those portfolios off of their balance sheet. And in doing so, they've had a $150 million impact in the market. So it shows that you can get kind of creative with these type of warehousing or aggregation facilities. And even if you have a modest amount of capital, you can have a really big impact in the market. So that's the first main product that we're going to launch. I mean, the last piece I won't belabor because I think based on reactions, it looked like you guys don't have a CPACE program. But for us, another thing we found really attractive about it is with CPACE, you can finance 100% of the project costs. And particularly during COVID, we need to find ways that people can start saving money immediately and preferably delay the debt service payments. And with CPACE, they don't have to service their debt until the following tax cycle. So you can see that small businesses will save money immediately, and they don't actually have to start making payments for a while. The OnBill program that we see particularly well suited for low and moderate income, we think we have a good opportunity here in the state, and I'll show you why. But we also see this as a good answer for beneficial electrification, particularly tariff-based programs, which essentially don't increase the debt load of the homeowners. They're viewed more as a utility surcharge as opposed to a loan. We think this is a great way to reach low income. You're not further compromising folks that are already in a financially compromised position. The debt obligation won't follow them if they leave the household. It's attached to the property. So there's just a lot of benefits to this construct that makes it really attractive to us. It's also attractive because in Colorado, we have a very fragmented utility system. We have 2 IOUs that cover about 55% of our customers. The remaining 45% of our citizens are served by over 50 utilities, co-ops, munis, rural electric associations. So what does this mean? It means there's a lot of people to potentially partner with, a lot of utility partnerships to cultivate. We also have a really high percentage of credit constrained consumers. And again, if you're credit constrained, you're not going to get a loan from any commercial lender. Credit union, CDFI, bank, similarly, they're going to be excluded. And so we felt, again, this is ripe for an OnBill type of construct. I forgot to mention OnBill, because you're attaching it to the utility bill, instead of being bound to just FICO and debt to income, you can get more creative. You can say, look, you might have a poor credit score, but you've paid your utility bill on time for 12 months and you don't have any bankruptcies in the last 3 years. So you're qualified. So you can expand that box a little bit by attaching it to the utility bill. And that's why we feel like it's a great tool for addressing this percentage of credit constrained consumers. And we also have a large percentage of energy burdened, impoverished, and stressed households that pay a disproportionate amount of their household annual income towards energy costs. And this is a problem. It causes further income inequality in our state. And we could easily address this by reducing utility bills. So there's a need, there's a model, and we feel like we're a good entity for filling that need. What we plan to do is essentially set up an on-bill repayment fund. We would provide subsidized capital to willing utility partners who would then essentially finance the upgrades, place a surcharge on the utility bill of the participating homeowner, who then services the debt via that separate line item on their utility bill. Ideally, we would work with a partner consumer lender. You see that in this gray box down here. Ideally, we would find somebody that is interested, but maybe has concerns about the perceived risk of the people we're lending to. And in which case, we could offer a loan loss reserve or some sort of credit enhancement to share in that risk and get them to provide the loan. That said, if they're not willing, and in fact, I should say that first project that we facilitated the lending, that's essentially the construct that we deployed. There was a lender that was willing, we backstopped it with some other capital from the state. Now, that utility was a highly credit rated utility. As we get further into rural Colorado, there are some utilities that don't have those credit ratings. And so for them, if there isn't a commercial lender that we can partner with, we're just going to provide the loan ourselves. But I offer that example because really the name of the game of this is unlocking vast sums of private capital that are sitting on the sidelines. That's why we're always trying to partner with commercial existing lenders, but also trying to understand their realities. A lot of these regulated entities can't provide loans to certain sectors. So we're trying to put our capital to work in a way that allows them to overcome their current barriers, invites them into these spaces that they don't play. And in doing so, we can unlock a lot more capital than I'm ever going to have under our roof. Our capital structure and operating model, our target raise is $30 million now. In fact, I'm happy to report the state of Colorado recently included a $30 million line item for us in the governor's most recent supplemental budget request to our legislature. It's going through a legislative process right now. It's passed through the Senate. It moves to the House. So we're guardedly optimistic this will pass. But I offer this slide because before we even had a line of sight for that money, we had a target of a $10 million raise, and we were targeting foundations, state, federal government. Ideal forms were grants and program-related investments, essentially low-interest loans from foundations. If we could get a loan at 1% from a foundation, that would allow us to tack on a modest spread to cover our administrative costs, but still offer an attractive loan product on the back end. Money from the state, if it's at 0%, that's even better. But I think we all know in order to fill these gaps, we can't be raising market rate capital or 10% capital. It just doesn't work. So that does unfortunately limit the audiences that you're trying to raise capital from. It's typically going to be foundations, state, local government. We need cheap money that allows us to then still tack on spreads to cover our costs and become financially solvent and self-sustainable businesses, but still offer the consumers an attractively priced product. And there's only so many people that you can raise that capital from. But that was our objective. If we could raise a pool of capital that we owed 3% debt on, this was very conservative, we could still lend at 5 or 6%, and that spread would cover our costs. Obviously, the notion though is to try to get those costs as low as possible. And just a basic analysis here, we felt by doing that, we could be financially self-sufficient in year 3. And so that was ultimately what we were seeking to do. The money from the state changes everything. We'll be financially self-sufficient immediately on day 1. And it allows us to build some internal capacity that we likely wouldn't have been able to do with just that $10 million that we were seeking to raise. So this is, I think, probably the meat of the discussion. And again, I'll go quickly because I'd love to open it up and have more of an open discussion. But our lessons learned, again, ours is a unique situation. We weren't funded by the state, so we had to start from scratch. And what I learned quickly was sequencing was important. I had this notion of we should close a project, it'll get us some good press, but really what we learned from that was the role that we played wasn't super compelling. We facilitated something, but I don't think the market found that to be a very compelling role. And long story short, what we learned was raising investment capital like immediately is critical. Instead of spending time on that first project, I wish I had spent time on raising the investment capital. I thought the project would help kind of grease the wheels towards investment capital, but raising the investment capital takes time, and the faster you can start it, the better. So yeah, sequencing is important. That said, also to raise that investment capital, I also thought I first approached foundations with the conceptual idea of a green bank, thinking it would be attractive to folks to understand the broad kind of approaches that we could take to filling these gaps. I actually found those audiences wanted to know more specifically, like what would we do with their capital? And so before approaching those audiences, I actually found it was important to at least have an idea of the first market or 2 markets you're going to be entering. And at the very least, a conceptual idea of how you're planning to enter those markets. Because I was kind of surprised with the foundations. It was a nice surprise. They wanted to move past the concept. They understood it well. And very quickly get to like, how are you going to position my money? What's the payback term? Like, what are the impacts you're going to have in this market? So it's kind of this, like, you need to raise investment capital quickly, but you also have to know what products are going to be supported by that capital because the funders are going to want to know. And then an eye towards the future product development and staffing is key. We spent so much time focused on raising capital, then all of a sudden we had a line of sight towards capital, and it was like, well, now we need to figure out our staffing plan. And it's not like the state's going to want to see me hire 20 people right out the gate. So we're going to have to outsource some functions. And oh, shoot, there's a lot of different people we could work with. So I quickly had to shift gears to What functions are we going to outsource? What are the community of providers that I need to interview, and ultimately put these decisions in front of my board? To give you an example, we're going to outsource our CPA services. I think this is a function that we can easily outsource. It's more cost effective than me hiring an internal accountant. So just ideas like that, thinking through, like, it's easy to get kind of bogged down in the capital raise process, and then you're structuring your products and kind of forget about the business development to a certain extent. You kind of got to be working on all of these in tandem. The sequencing is still important. I still think raising capital, developing products, at least concepts, raising capital, but then quickly an eye towards the business development. You got to be ready to lend the second the money hits your bank account. And that's really where we are right now. Procuring pro bono legal support is huge. I mean, I didn't have this for a while and it was a struggle. I have it now and it's made a world of difference. You're just going to run into a lot of different issues that you're going to have to consult with an attorney. And then the connection to state government, if possible, has proven to be valuable. We're an independent nonprofit, but we do have an ex officio board seat that is dedicated to a government official, the executive director of our energy office. The foundation in the energy world, I had a strong network here in Colorado. The foundations didn't know who I was or what I did. And they constantly were asking, like, is the state supportive of this? Where is the state on this? And so having that connection actually was quite valuable. And then our priorities is just close this capital. I should know by the end of May if we're receiving this money from the state. 30 million is a great start, but we need hundreds of millions of dollars to fill these gaps. And so we're going to continue trying to raise capital from foundations and other sources. So close this raise, but still with an eye towards more. Establish that operational apparatus for the future, making sure that you have everything dialed, like even thinking through, in order to procure insurance policies, which is really important for lending and your directors and officers, you're going to have some basic set of policies and procedures in place. They want to see, like, what internal checks and balances do you have? Like, so even thinking through just those little nuances of starting a business, policies and procedures, figuring out who all your partners are, outsourced vendors, getting all of that in place is really important to begin lending. We're originating deal flow as we speak. We need to produce quick wins. The state's going to expect to see us deploy this money fairly quickly. And so having that pipeline on the sidelines is really important. And then, of course, I mean, kind of at the risk of stating the obvious, capitalize on successes with media pushes. And then over time, I mean, the apparatus that we put in place, it's going to be great for day one, but we're going to have to refine it over time, particularly our processes for asset risk management. So then getting into really the nuances of being a lender. So it's kind of like you're cobbling together this machine. You put in all the protections you can, you start deploying, and then ultimately learn some lessons and refine and improve over time. So that's a lot. I apologize for motoring through that, but I, again, would love to open it up for discussion. I think that's probably the most value we can get from this. But that was our story. That's how we've come to be. That's where we are and where we're heading. It definitely wasn't the easiest path, but I think hopefully it shows that even if you're not able to tap into a large sum of public capital, it's still doable. It may take more time, but I hope are a good example of it can be done.
Well, thank you, Paul, for your presentation.
Yeah, of course.
Amazing amount of information. Do we have any questions?
Well, it was fascinating, and I'm so glad we'll have access to your slides, because I was trying to keep up with the notes. Did have a question. I think I read on your website, or maybe you mentioned it, that the OnBill initiative that you are undertaking is starting off as a pilot, right? So how big is it in scope right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so the fact that we were able to range the capital stack for that first utility. I think we're viewing that as the pilot that we're now looking to replicate. The good news is that program's working quite well. They're deploying capital, it's getting used. I don't know the exact number of loans, but they've quickly ramped up to a few hundred loans just in the past year. So it's going well. I don't think they're reaching as many low and moderate income households as we would like to see. So there's definitely some adjustments to be made. That program also, they decided to approach it from an on-bill loan type of approach as opposed to a tariff-based approach. So my next priority is to find a utility that's willing to do the tariff-based approach with us. I think that is a more effective tool for low and moderate income households. So I think once we get that stood up, the fact that we'll have kind of one of each, we can figure out what's working well, what isn't, and then replicate kind of the optimal model going forward.
That's absolutely fascinating for us because coming out of our state energy plan, which was a stakeholder process in 2016, and then most recently our energy efficiency roadmap, which I'm sure Hialeah mentioned to you, that precipitated this discussion, our green bank discussion, because that was one of the priorities. I mean, on-bill financing continues to be of tremendous interest in our state. We have one very successful model through the Help My House program through the co-ops, but we have yet to see it replicated. And I think there's a tremendous need for it, and it could serve the communities that are currently not being served by a lot of programs. So we very well might like to follow up with you and pick your brain a little more to explore that. So thank you for that information.
Yeah, of course. And I'd be happy to help in any way I can. The one thing I will say is, I mean, OnBill's been around for a while. I think a lot of us, I mean, it was 10 years ago, I thought OnBill was like the holy grail, and it's been slow to really materialize, and it's hard to move these utilities. So we're under no illusion that this is going to be the singular answer for low and moderate income. In fact, I mean, I see Dwan on the call now, and it's great to see you. I mean, what Self is doing in Florida, we're incredibly interested in learning how to do that, because again, it's like a snail's pace with these utilities. If we stand up one or two OnBill programs with one or two utilities over the next year or two, we're doing good work. That still leaves so many gaps in the market. So I think the name of the game with a lot of this, like I mentioned with a small commercial, we have a small commercial C-PACE product, but we want to couple it with an unsecured product. Residential, similar. You need like multiple tools, and based on the unique circumstances of that individual borrower, it's better to be able to go to them with options.
Yeah, I wanted to back up a little bit and ask a question about, you had, it seems like we're doing or trying to model the same order that you did your green bank with the assessment and then setting up an entity. How did you do the assessment? Did you have to fund the assessment? You know, we're kind of at that point. How did you get that done? And what group did you pull together?
We were fortunate in that right around the time that we were stalling with our legislative efforts to create a quasi-public, DOE had released a competitive grant offering, and I can't remember the exact scope, but they were essentially looking at innovative financing mechanisms. And so it was just good timing, but I would definitely encourage you to take a look and see if they have any open competitive grant offerings or any upcoming. You know, if we weren't able to get that grant, I actually did find after the fact, as I was engaging with foundations for our investment capital, I actually think there would have been a very receptive audience for that type of effort, and more in the ballpark of what they were comfortable supporting. I was asking for 7 figures, and I think a lot of these entities were comfortable with maybe providing us $100,000 to advance our efforts. But that would have been capital that would have been perfectly positioned for a scoping exercise.
Just for clarification, Paul, the competitive funding through DOE that wasn't the competitive SEP funding, right? That is no longer offered.
I think it was the competitive SEP.
Okay.
Funding.
They're not offered. Okay,
they don't do that anymore. Yeah, I'm a little bit removed. I haven't dealt with it in a while, but that's unfortunate. It was that really helped us get off the ground.
Well, and what was the general ballpark of the cost of that assessment for you all?
It was a $150,000 grant that we received.
So, hi everybody. Hey Paul, I'm sorry I was late, so I missed a great part of the beginning, and I'm very sorry for that. We're going to be speaking soon, but I was just very interested in what I heard at the end. You were saying that you have now $30 million. Can you go back to that? Did you
Yeah.
have, do you have $30 million right now that you're going to deploy, and you got it from foundations? And I thought your comment about, the foundations being more receptive was really interesting, because for us, it's been the opposite, where the foundations are not receptive. First of all, it's like a country club. You have to be invited to like get into, in front of a foundation. And if you don't have like somebody that invites you that knows somebody, then it's really, really tough
Yeah.
to get in there. So I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on those capital sources that you're talking about. And then of course, you and I can follow up. Everybody else on this panel knows how we fill the gap for capital sources.
Yeah, so we don't have the 30 yet. It is going, the history on it is we've been pushing the state to provide some capital to us just to get us started. And it's taken a while, but Governor Polis included a $30 million line item for us in his most recent budget request. It's going through a legislative process right now. It's a very contentious debate right now. But it did pass out of the Senate yesterday, and it moves over to the House. So we're guardedly optimistic we have the votes, and we'll know in a few weeks. But that would be state capital. On the foundation front, we did have willing audiences when it came to kind of smaller ticket items, but the one similar to your experience, I had always heard there's this massive pool of concessionary capital and impact investments and a willing audience. And maybe I'm speaking to the wrong people, but I haven't found that to be quite the case. I think there's definitely a huge role for foundations to play. I had made some progress with local foundations that I do feel confident I might be able to procure maybe like a large 6-figure sum or a small 7-figure sum in the future, especially now that I have a balance sheet. But
Right.
before I did, no, it was extremely difficult trying to raise the investment capital from foundations. I think they would be better suited for like operating capital and small grants. But yeah, it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. No, I agree with that comment. And I would just, based on our experience, 10 years, track record, they wouldn't give us the time of the day before we had reached like 6 years, 7 years track record. I think that one of the things, just again, this is kind of a lessons learned, was foundations love these big ideas, and everything has to be big and scalable. You can't really talk to them about reality. You have to talk to them about like a dream, and they'll kind of they'll bite on that, but then you have to back it up with track record. So,
Yeah.
If you can't speak big volumes, I mean, we worked with a partner who got $7 million from Calvert, I think, and a guarantee from MacArthur Foundation for an idea that was not tested, and that honestly, from a financial perspective, was not sustainable. Yet they got the money, but it was because that person came from the foundation world and had worked in I mean, it's not because of that. The idea was great, but it's a lot about those connections. So just for everybody on this panel to know that's, if you're gonna, focus your efforts on something, I would leave that in the back burner. And like you said, focus on the local community, local foundations that can help you with technical assistance, capacity building, outreach, that kind of thing. That's going to be more market based and more project based as well. And that is kind of a far toss there with the foundations. But it's great to hear that you're that far with the state. And is that all loan capital?
This actually, I mean, we're quite blessed. It's going to be a grant from the state that we can then use for on lending, a modest portion for our operations. So we've committed to not using any more than 15% of it for operations, but it'll be enough for us to hire a few FTE, which I'm very eager to do, and then the rest will support our first lending products. Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, we were very fortunate. I recognize that's not possible in a lot of states. But it also took us a long time. So I would say, I mean, it's still worth constantly vying for it. And we weren't expecting it, and it came through. So it's always worth a shot. I mean, the state money, if you can get it, it's, as we were talking about earlier, you really need kind of concessionary capital to make a lot of this work. And the money from the state will really give us a lot of flexibility to enter some markets that we may not have been able to if we had more expensive capital.
Would it be possible for you to discuss a little bit more about how the energy companies have not embraced on-bill financing?
Like the utilities? Yeah, so our investor-owned utilities, you can't even have the conversation with them. Now, the co-ops and the munis here, which, as I said, we have a lot of them, there's actually a lot of receptivity to it. So I will say I'm confident in about a handful will actually move forward with these programs. They're slow. The ones that are resistant, you'll get a variety of excuses. Like, one will be the update to the billing software that they inevitably have to do. But we also found a few of the utilities that were providing that. We knew what software they were on, and it was the same software that, yes, they had to hire somebody to make some adjustments, but it was very capable of administering an on-bill program. So that's the most common one I get. But then there are some very real concerns. So there's a co-op in rural Colorado that literally has a handful of staff. There's no way they could manage contractors. And contractor management's a huge key to this all. Like, we need to make sure that the consumer is being protected. So what we also have been working to do is we've gotten our Colorado Energy Office to consider providing the contractor management function on behalf of the utilities. So I think that was actually a very real concern that was voiced. They just don't have those resources. Neither does my institution. But there are other institutions in the state that do. The Energy Office, when I used to work there, we set up a residential loan program that's doing quite well. It's modeled after Michigan Saves and the Smarty loan program, but it's only for that upper income FICO qualified consumer, but they're managing the contractors for that program. So what we've gone and said is, like, why not expand that service that you're providing to this program to these rural utility on-bill programs? And I think we'll get there with the state. So yeah, I think you'll hear a lot of excuses as to why they can't. You might also hear a few valid reasons, and then it just takes getting creative and trying to come up with solutions to help them. Technical assistance, sorry, the last thing I'll say is technical assistance too. Some of them just don't know how to do this, but there are, like, EESI is an organization that provides free technical assistance. There are others out there as well. And again, that could be a valid concern, but we're offering the utilities that we approach free technical assistance. We essentially said, like, we'll bring the technical assistance, we'll help stand up the program, we'll bring the capital to support the program, and we're lining up a partner that can do the contractor management for you.
When you say contractor management, are you talking about the people who do the installations, that, like, HVAC installations, that type of thing? Well,
yeah, and the way we've structured is, so the Energy Office for the other residential loan program, they'll register contractors. So they'll require contractors have to apply. So in order to be able to access the program, we need to make sure you're a credible contractor. So they're taking a look at your insurance qualifications, make sure that you don't have any blemishes. But similarly, they'll then provide ongoing management as well. So if the contractor has questions, they can go to the Energy Office. If the contractor starts performing bad work or there's disputes with the homeowners, the Energy Office essentially polices all of that and can kick contractors out of programs. So they're essentially like the eyes and ears of the program when it comes to making sure that the contractors that are using this program are doing so effectively and, like, credibly.
it would have never occurred to me that the Energy Office or the companies, for that matter, would be managing the contractors directly, because, like, say, for instance, our organization manages the Duke Energy program in South Carolina that does the same thing, replacing HVACs and so on, refrigerators and all that. and doing some home repairs. And SC Housing also contracts with a number of community action agencies and other entities to do the same. So it doesn't seem like there would be a lack of willing organizations that could do that work. And so that shouldn't be a barrier anywhere, really. So I was wondering, can we hear if those same reasons are being given in South Carolina, or if they're more creative, or how receptive the companies are around here? I was wondering if maybe Ms. Catherine and Stacy could give us a rundown on that.
For Duke, a couple of years ago, we asked about OnBill financing, and we got the computer system won't be able to handle it, but their new system that they've just done to help merge together Duke Energy, Carolinas, and Progress systems, that one is supposed to be able to accept OnBill financing programs by 2023. So there's actually a committee that's looking at OnBill financing with Duke now to be ready when the computer system is ready. So that is moving forward in Duke territory.
Yeah, and Stacy, this is Brian. Just to expand on that a little bit, the North Carolina Utilities Settlement Agreement included the requirement for Duke to at least come up with a design by this fall. So that should really kind of accelerate stuff along. That's what we're hoping. But I guess back to Paul, I had a question a little bit more about the OnBill and linking it with other leverage programs. Let's say, for example, you get your 30 million from the state, you want to expand that more. Any thinking about like the USDA's Rural Energy Savings Program and trying to link with that? Because I think a number of co-ops are faced with that difficulty, or even munis that might have some interest, but because they're so small, you've got to go to some larger entity. That's how the Help My House program in South Carolina evolved, which is really was central, pulling the half a dozen or so co-ops together and saying, we're going to manage some of this activity for you. But could the Colorado Green Bank, or even in the case of South Carolina, if there's a Green Bank, to maybe come forward and apply to USDA on behalf of co-ops or things like that? Is that something you guys are looking at or thinking about? I wonder if it'd be applicable, to South Carolina.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. And actually, coincidentally, we have a loan application out to the REST program right now. So we did apply for $5 million. Just for everyone's understanding, this program used to only be available to utilities, but USDA wasn't deploying the capital quickly enough, or really at all. And so they expanded the eligibility criteria to include state entities, like an energy office could apply, and also nonprofits. So us being a nonprofit, we view this as our opportunity to essentially do exactly what you just said, Brian. A lot of our utilities didn't want to apply for this funding, either due to a lack of resources, or they've had struggles working with USDA in the past. So our utilities just weren't taking advantage of this money. And so the way we applied was essentially saying, like, look, USDA, view us as an extension of you. We'll be the ones that deploy it locally. Instead of having each of our individual utilities having to like apply for this funding, we'll apply for it, we'll manage the pool, and then we'll disperse it, ideally through utility programs. So yeah, we do have that loan application outstanding. I will say RESP is not without its challenges. It's a great program. It's 0% interest. It says it's a 20-year loan, but you're actually only allowed to on-lend the capital at 10-year terms. So that's one thing to be aware of. Not insurmountable, but we'd love to provide even longer term loans. There's some other collateral requirements associated with the program, which are pretty stringent and challenging. So it's got its issues, or some I guess challenges to consider, but it's a lot of money. It's 0% interest. It's really aligned with what we're all trying to do. So I think it's a great source of funding, and I'll keep the group posted as to if we receive it. We hope we will.
Well, we are at exactly 3 o'clock. I don't know if there were any more questions. If there were, we can stick around for a minute or two. Just really be cautious of people's time. Also, Paul, I just wanted to let you know that Sam did put a note in the chat commenting on Minnesota's approach to the CPACE
Cool.
for small business lending. So thank you, Sam, for your comments.
Quick
Yeah.
question, Paul, are you doing audits, energy audits?
We're not, no.
Okay.
Well, I mean, some of the programs like the OnBill program we're helping support, some of those utilities that we're talking to are going to require audits, but we're not specifically like involved in that.
You're not requiring audits either for the loans that you're going to put out.
Well, for the small commercial loans that's the first project we're launching, we do require audits. So yeah, sorry, I thought you asked like, are we paying for audits or actually administering audits? No, but a lot of our lending products will require audits.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just again, sharing what we did was the utilities sometimes won't give you, a lot of things you ask for, but sometimes they're willing to give you auditing for free.
Right.
So that's another source. But yeah, I was just curious if you were including that or managing that. It's a big question we get from investors a lot of times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any last minute questions?
Well, and everyone also please feel free to reach out offline. I obviously want to see these efforts take off everywhere. So I'm always happy to help. Please don't be shy. I'm happy to answer any questions I can.
Well, thank you, Paul, for coming to talk to us today. Definitely a successful second Green Bank Fireside chat. Really appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, I was happy to. It was great being
Thank
here.
you.
It was nice meeting you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.